Good evening. Vladimir Putin appears to be doubling down on Ukraine, stepping up Russia's role in the fight between Ukraine's government and rebels there. Tonight, the U.S. and Ukraine are accusing Russia of firing artillery on Ukrainian troops from Russian soil and preparing to move more heavy weapons over the border. It is a dangerous escalation in the most serious tensions between Russia and the West since the Cold War. David Martin begins our coverage.
Not every video can be verified, but U.S. officials say that half a dozen times over the past 2 weeks, Russia has fired barrages from its own territory into Ukraine. The shelling, which Russian soldiers have been bragging about on the internet, lasts about a half hour and appears to be aimed at Ukrainian military units fighting the separatist rebels. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Martin Dempsey said Vladimir Putin is showing no signs of being cowed by the international condemnation of Russia's alleged role in the shootdown of the Malaysian airliner.
There may be some folks who could convince themselves that Putin would be looking for a reason to de-escalate. He's actually taken a decision to escalate.
The shelling began at the same time Russia increased the flow of weapons to the rebels in Ukraine, including tanks, artillery, multiple rocket launchers, and apparently the surface-to-air missile which shot down the airliner. The weapons are identical to those in the arsenals of the Ukrainian military, allowing the rebels to claim they captured them on the battlefield. They are coming from this base in southern Russia, where a much larger caliber rocket launcher has been spotted in recent days. A comparison of satellite photos from June and July show how much the supply base has expanded in the past month.
Both the shelling and the arms shipments appear to be driven by the fact that the rebels have suffered a series of setbacks at the hands of the Ukrainian military.
We're getting word that there may be a pause in the vicious war in Gaza. Hamas, which controls the 32-mile-long Palestinian homeland, announced tonight that it will agree to a ceasefire for 12 hours tomorrow. A senior U.S. official says Israel has also agreed to the pause. The ceasefire was negotiated by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who said this before leaving Cairo tonight.
The whole world is watching a tragic moment after tragic moment unfold and wondering, when is everybody going to come to their senses?
Violence spread today to the other Palestinian enclave on the West Bank of the Jordan River. Don Daler is in Jerusalem tonight. And Don, there were riots in the West Bank after yesterday's school bombing.
There were at least 6 people died in demonstrations around Jerusalem in the past 24 hours. The largest was last night in the West Bank when some 10,000 protesters faced off against Israeli security. We saw sporadic fighting today in places such as Ramallah, where police fired rubber bullets at slingshot-wielding Palestinians. Now, this was all sparked, as you said, by the Gaza school tragedy, and there is a real fear here that if all this death and all this sadness and tragedy doesn't lead to something real, tangible improvements in people's lives in Gaza as well as the West Bank, then all this anger could erupt into another intifada.
Don Daler reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you. Militant group Hamas has launched thousands of rockets from Gaza into Israel, demanding that the Israelis lift a 7-year blockade of Gaza. Israel launched its offensive to take out the Hamas rockets. 864 Palestinians have been killed, the vast majority of them civilians. 16 were killed yesterday when a UN school was hit. Barry Peterson met their families today.
For Abed Rabu, a quiet graveside moment with his 18-month-old daughter killed at the UN school yesterday. I want to know your thoughts as you stand here at the grave of your daughter, Soha. It's like I've lost part of myself, he said. She used to smile and play, and then suddenly she was gone. All of these new graves are from people who were killed in the school incident. They were buried so hurriedly that families can only mark the grave with a piece of cardboard attached to a stick. The UN sent weapons experts to the school today to investigate the attack, but they had to turn back due to heavy gunfire in the area. The Israelis claim surveillance drones have spotted Hamas militants using schools, hospitals, and mosques for military purposes. And twice, the UN has found Hamas storing weapons in its vacant schools. But it also means heavy civilian casualties in Gaza, where more women and children have been killed than Hamas soldiers. Today, we met one more casualty from the school incident when Abed Rabu took us to see his badly wounded 13-year-old son, Ahmed. I was hit by shrapnel, he told us. I couldn't do anything for my family because I was bleeding. Can we ask him how he's feeling? And just when it seemed Abed Rabu was almost unable to feel, was numb from what had happened to his family, the pain finally poured out.
This escalation in the fighting can only hurt the investigation of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. 298 people were killed when the jetliner was shot down over Ukraine 8 days ago. Mark Phillips is at the crash site.
The large Dutch and Australian investigation teams, the coalition of the grieving they're being called, have still not arrived. But the handful of aviation and forensic experts who are here have made another grisly discovery. Michael Borkukov of the OSCE monitoring group.
The Dutch have just documented some very small human remains over there in that field as well.
But the inspectors have concluded that after more than a week, there's little chance of finding substantial remains of the 100 or so victims who haven't been accounted for. Most of them, they fear, were consumed in the fireball that was hot enough to melt metal. They are finding more evidence, though, of the sort of blast holes through the plane that an exploding missile might make. The Dutch say their full team will concentrate on this sort of specific find. Covering the vast crash site systematically would be too difficult, and security arrangements are still uncertain.
The issue is who's in charge here. Any deal cut with the central government in Kiev has zero value here in an area it doesn't control. And the rebels who do control this countryside haven't been around this crash site for days.
Only a small rebel detachment now accompanies the inspectors. The rest are busy fighting a war elsewhere.
And Scott, with the conflict intensifying between those rebels and the central Ukrainian government, the window for an international investigation into the crash is closing.
Mark Phillips in the war zone in eastern Ukraine. Mark, thank you. There was an aggressive response today when a passenger on a Canadian jetliner allegedly made a threat. And Bob Orr is following this for us. Bob?
Scott, a Canadian man now is charged with endangering public safety in a bomb scare that ended with a SWAT team storming a passenger plane. It looked like a commando raid as heavily armed Canadian officers rushed aboard Sunwing Flight 772 at Toronto's Pearson Airport. This cell phone video shows the SWAT team hustling through the Boeing 737, barking orders to the jet's passengers, including Sharon Ramsey.
They stormed in. It was extremely scary. They came in front and back of the plane, and they yelled, "Hands up, heads down, hands up, heads down," and it was just awful. Kids were scared. I was scared.
Sources say the flight from Toronto was about 40 minutes into its trip to Panama when a passenger, 25-year-old Ali Shahi, allegedly made threats to a flight attendant. According to one U.S. official, Shahi said, quote, "I have a bomb and I will blow up Canada." The captain of the jet, flying at 33,000 feet over West Virginia, notified U.S. officials of the threat and then turned back for Toronto. Two F-16s on patrol near Toledo were redirected and shadowed the jet as it flew back into Canadian airspace. Flight 772, with 183 passengers and a crew of 6, landed safely. Sources say the suspect, who has a history of mental problems, was arrested without incident. While this event drew a heavy police response, bomb threats, unfortunately, are pretty common. Scott, we've heard of at least 5 threats against U.S. transit targets in just the past 2 days.
We all recognize that we have to do more to address the root causes of the problem, and that includes poverty and violence in Central America. I discussed this when I met with Central American leaders last year in Costa Rica, and we are committed to working together in partnership with each of these countries to find ways in which we can come up with more aggressive action plans to improve security and development and governance in these countries. I expressed to them that we have a shared responsibility, for example, when it comes to dealing with drug trafficking, that we are dealing with the demand for drugs in the United States and doing more to stop the cross-border flows of arms, for example, from the north to the south. And I also continue to emphasize the fact that not just if, but when we pass comprehensive immigration reform in this country, then we will have the capacity not only to strengthen resources at our borders, but we're also going to have the capacity to create more orderly ways for legal migration, in some cases temporary worker programs that allow people to advance economically, allow our economy to grow, allow families to be reunified, but also in many cases allow people to return to their families in their home countries.
A lot of people were talking today about the NFL's 2-game suspension of star running back Ray Rice of the Baltimore Ravens. Rice was charged with aggravated assault, but the charge will be dropped if he completes counseling. James Brown, the host of the NFL Today. JB, Rice's punishment certainly caused a lot of chatter in the league today.
Scott, that it did, and the pushback from the public has been pretty strong. Most people saying that domestic violence is not equivalent to making a mistake. As a matter of fact, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is taking an awful lot of heat for what some consider to be a relatively light suspension. A highly regarded official I talked with said, compared to other suspensions, a first-time offender using performance-enhancing drugs, a 4-game suspension. Michael Vick engaged in dogfighting, an indefinite suspension. Ben Roethlisberger, the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, accused of sexual assault but not convicted, initially a 6-game suspension that was reduced to 4.
But the Ravens coach, John Harbaugh, he's standing by Rice.
Scott, he was pretty philosophical about the entire matter, but at the end of the day, he stood by his player.
Consequences when you make a mistake like that. I stand behind Ray. He's a heck of a guy. He's done everything right since. He makes a mistake, all right? He's going to have to pay a consequence. I think that's good for kids to understand that it works that way. That's how it works. That's how it should be.
Noteworthy, Scott, that the pushback has been strong from women and men who said that the league missed an opportunity to send a much stronger signal about domestic violence.
James Brown of the NFL Today. Thanks, JB.
Another militant atrocity in Afghanistan. At least 15 people are executed in a roadside attack in Afghanistan's Kor province. Now, Afghan officials say a suspected Taliban militant stopped 2 vehicles in the central province and shot everyone dead. Local authorities say the gunman made the vehicles pull over and ordered everyone out. Then they lined the passengers up on the side of the road before shooting them one by one. On Thursday, 2 female Finnish aid workers were also gunned down in Herat by 2 assailants on a motorcycle.
The leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, is calling for firm and armed resistance against Israel.
این رژیم علاجش جز از بین رفتن و نابود شدن نیست. خب حالا تا وقتی که از بین نرفته است علاج چیست؟ تا وقتی که سر پاس این رژیم جعلی و نابود نشده است علاج چیست؟ علاج مقاومت قاطع و مسلحانه در مقابل این رژیمه. این علاج.
Ayatollah Khamenei also said those who are concerned about the fate of the Palestinians should act to arm the occupied West Bank, just like Gaza. But the leader noted that the annihilation of the Zionist regime never means the massacre of Jews living in the occupied lands of Palestine. Ayatollah Khamenei pointed out that a referendum in the occupied lands will put an end to the existence of the Zionist entity. He says this is what the common sense of the international community also agrees on.
在它最近的部分的时候，它第一开始它是没有先爆炸，它只是先起火燃烧。
There wasn't an explosion at first. The plane was just on fire. Then 1 or 2 minutes later, we heard the first explosion, but the sound wasn't loud. There were still passengers escaping from the plane, and the children were screaming for help.
其实那时候是在机场里面，还有小朋友都在呼救。空难当天晚上真的是没办法入睡，直到现。
On the night of the accident, I couldn't sleep. Until now, I haven't been able to sleep. The scene keeps repeating in my mind. I felt better after I prayed at the temple, but the picture is still there. I'm now a bit scared to get on a plane.
所以现在搭飞机还是会有点心里会有点会害怕这样。
The priority is to clean up the area, and then other government departments will do the best to make villagers feel at ease.
Flight AH5017 disappeared just 15 minutes after takeoff from Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. Other officials gave different timings, adding to confusion about where the aircraft might be. The plane was travelling to Algiers with 110 passengers and 6 crew on board. Air Algerie spokesman Houari Zuhair said the plane was last monitored at 1:55 GMT while flying over the region of Gao in Mali. Spanish private airline company Swift Air confirmed it had no contact with the MD-83 aircraft. The plane's pilots are Spanish. Burkinabe authorities have set up a crisis unit in Ouagadougou airport to provide information to families of people on the flight. A helpline has also been set up for the relatives of those on board.
Syria, Takfiri militants have reportedly killed at least 50 government forces. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a London-based Syrian opposition organisation, has confirmed the incident, which occurred in Raqqa province. The observatory has said most of the soldiers were summarily executed after being captured by ISIL militants in an ambush. The militants and other insurgent groups fighting against the Syrian government have committed numerous mass executions during the conflict. The atrocities have been condemned by human rights groups and foreign countries.
Norway has taken exceptional security measures after being informed of a possible terrorist attack by militants fighting in Syria. The country's intelligence chief says they've received information that a group of extremists from Syria may be planning a terrorist attack in Norway. Also, Norwegian police say the information pointed to a possible attack in Europe, with Norway being specifically mentioned. The country's prime minister has now postponed her summer holiday. There have been growing concerns in Europe about the increasing national security threats posed by insurgents returning from war-torn Syria. In a report, the International Center for the Study of Radicalization has said that some 11,000 foreign militants from over 70 countries are fighting in Syria against the government.
Hamas and Qatar want a ceasefire that will legitimize terrorism, will legitimize the armament of Gaza, and actually will legitimize, under certain conditions, launching rockets at Israeli civilians. One thing is clear, Wolf. Terrorism shouldn't be appeased, and there should be no prize for terrorism for launching rockets on Israeli civilians.
So it sounds to me, Minister, correct me if I'm wrong, that the deliberations Prime Minister Netanyahu and you and your other cabinet ministers have been having, it doesn't sound likely that this latest proposal for a one-week ceasefire is something that Israel is going to accept.
No, let's separate two things. Israel was ready already, also in the past, and will be ready in the future if necessary to make humanitarian ceasefire. Israel was ready to accept the Egyptian proposal for a complete ceasefire, immediate ceasefire. It was rejected by Hamas. But one thing is clear. The target, the goal should be a real enduring ceasefire and bringing security and confidence and calm to the people of Israel, also to the people of Gaza. In order to achieve this, you have to demilitarize Gaza. Gaza was supposed to be totally demilitarized. This is a Palestinian commitment signed by Abu Mazen on the White House lawn 20 years ago that Gaza will remain forever demilitarized. It was captured by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, organizations very similar to Al-Qaeda or ISIS in Iraq. And now Gaza should be demilitarized again. Otherwise, there will be no real solution to the situation.
Today, they killed 7 more Palestinians who are not Hamas. These are people who are peacefully demonstrating, demanding freedom and showing solidarity with their brothers in Gaza. And before that, Israel made a strike on a shelter, the United Nations shelter in one of the schools, and killed 16 people and injured 200, and then claimed that maybe they did not do the shooting. I mean, this is crazy. I think the intelligence minister that you've been speaking to is not intelligent at all. By talking about Qatar, and now he wants Israel to fight Qatar. This is very strange. I think what is happening is that Israel is dragging itself into big trouble, practicing terror.
Dr.
Yes.
Barghouti, I just want to be precise right now. If Israel does this unilateral 12-hour humanitarian ceasefire tomorrow morning, you're saying that Hamas has agreed to comply. Has Hamas also agreed to the U.S.-Egyptian proposal for a one-week ceasefire? Are you saying Hamas has agreed to that?
Not only Hamas, but all Palestinians. All Palestinian groups have agreed to 7 days ceasefire, during which time negotiations can start about all the several issues, including lifting the siege on Gaza. But Israel wants to continue the siege on Gaza. And now when they speak about demilitarizing Gaza, they don't tell us anything about demilitarizing the Israeli areas around Gaza, for instance. And why shouldn't there be an equal approach to the two sides? Actually, Israel does not want to demilitarize Hamas. Israel wants to prevent Palestinians the right to resist occupation.
Finally tonight, sometimes the most rewarding journey is one that you never hope to make.